snatched some of that grandparent flavor for ourselves.
We put on the beret, the sari, the clogs that our parents rejected as old-fashioned and tasteless. And we tried to learn the old language.
And when we were with our contemporaries, who we are so very, very much alike, but who seem so very, very different than us, sharing grandparents' stories helps us discover the bonds between us, how much the human family and the human story is the same.
Grandparent stories become our shared and sacred history. We can see how the tenderness and sweetness and endurance in ourselves comes from those things our grandparents shared with us. Oh, and we can also see where the stubbornness, the quick temper, and that receding hairline come from.
All grandparent stories are our grandparent stories.
Hey guys, I've got one. My grandparents lived next door to us, and every Sunday after dinner, I'd go over and they'd read me the Sunday comics, ever since I was a really little girl. Even now, they still save me the comics from the Sunday paper, and I'll go over and there'll be stacks and stacks of them, and I sit and read for hours. I still believe the comics are the most important part of the paper. No, I know they are.
Well, mine lived half an hour away from us growing up, but now that I'm commuting to work, I pass by their place. So, once a week, I stop and have dinner with them. It's great. We have the same thing every week. Tuna salad with sliced olives and some sort of soup. I thought I would get bored of it after a while, but it's really great. I'm getting to know them in a really different way.
Well, when I was a child, my parents and I lived in a big city in New England. But my grandparents and the rest of the family lived up in Nova Scotia. So when we'd go to visit them, it was so exciting because we were going to a foreign country. We'd have to cross the border and there'd be border guards there and they'd search our luggage. I always worried that they'd take my doll and consider it contraband. You know, my grandparents and the folks from back home, they talked funny and they ate strange things, different than what we had done. But to a child from the city, the Bay of Fundy was paradise. Did you know the sand was red? Sand, yeah. And they would take us clamming in the bay, and the clams would spit up at us through the red mud. We had to be quick or we'd get caught by the tide. We'd bring the clams home along with marsh greens. They kind of looked like grass, but tasted heavenly with just a little bit of vinegar and some sweet strawberries. Nothing like what we ate at home. My grandparents were very, very old. And to a very young child, they were a bit scary. But still, I loved going to visit them.
My Polish grandmother, Stella, was my grandfather's second wife and not my dad's mom. But as far as I'm concerned, she's my Grandma Adamski. I can clearly remember after each visit to them in their third-floor apartment, I would be walking down the stairway in the hall, and I would look up and yell, "Dziękuję," thank you, "for everything." And they'd smile and wave down at me. And I can almost still smell today the aroma that permeated that hallway. Grandma's delicious cabbage soup.
My grandfather always had a great big garden when I was growing up. And he also always had a dog. Every day in the summertime when he'd come home from work, he'd go out to the garden to weed and pick whatever was ripe. Well, this one big black dog that he had would follow him up and down the road. And whenever my grandpa was picking off the vine, the dog would kind of pooch up his lips like this. And he'd nip the same thing right off the vine, too.
My grandfather had a dog just like that, a tall red dog. We used to follow my Dedushka up to the berry patch. And just as fast as my Dedushka emptied the berries from his picking bowl into the big collecting bowl, well, the dog would gobble them right up. Until Dedushka caught him at it and chased him away. Well, then, the dog learned how to pooch up his lips, just like that, so he could pick the berries off the vine without getting a thorn in his snoot.
My grandfather used to truck fruits and vegetables into Brooklyn. And on days that he did that, well, on nights that he did that, he'd get up at 3 a.m. in the morning so that he'd get there on time. And on the way into the city, there was this long hill, and at the bottom of the hill, there was a stoplight. Well, when there wasn't any traffic, which was most of the time, since it was 3 a.m. in the morning, my grandfather would just sail through that light, whether it was red or green. One night, he sailed through it, and out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of a police car that turned its lights on and started following him. So he pulled over to the side of the road, jumped out of the truck, got under it, and started pulling on things and banging on things all right. And when he saw the policeman come up beside the truck, he called out, "Got it!" And then he called out and acted surprised to see the policeman there, and he explained, "Brake cable came loose." Then he hopped in the truck and went on.
Oh. Speaking of grandparents and cars. Okay. One time we had to go get my wife's granny and take her from one daughter's house to the other. So I volunteered to drive her car back while my wife and her folks and granny were in the other car. As soon as we started out, I realized this car had no brakes. She was one of those people who drove with one foot on the gas and one foot firmly on the brakes. And because she was French, both hands waving wildly around instead of steering. So we took off, and the other car was behind me, just kind of ward off traffic, and we were easing through stop signs and creeping through stoplights, and we made it all the way back. So we got there, and my father-in-law and I said we'd get Granny's stuff out of the car and bring it into the house. So my father-in-law went around the back and popped open the hatchback. There were these two really, really big garbage bags in there. So we thought they were full of knitting, so he went to try and lift one. And he looked inside, and I looked in the other. It wasn't knitting. The garbage bags were full of thousands of butane lighters. I'd been driving a brakeless gas-powered bomb for an hour and a half.